When you think about video game controllers, you probably think about what's available like through the first parties from Nintendo, Sony, Xbox. You have the Nintendo Switch Pro controller, you have the Xbox Series controller, and you have Sony's DualSense. They also have some pro lines of controllers, but we're not going to talk about that. I like to turn everyone's attention to the third party, the ones that are always trying to innovate, the ones that are always trying to drive the market, the ones that want to try to deliver the exact same experience for moreover an affordable price. Because let's be honest, a lot of these controllers pretty expensive, like being like $60 or up, you know? In this case, I'd like to talk about this one right here. This is the 8BitDo SN30 Pro USB gamepad. What are we talking about this one? It was on sale. So let's talk about this one. Just to clarify, this guy is designed for Nintendo Switch and PC Play. The controller itself is pretty light, which makes it really ideal when it comes to traveling. These guys do come in a wireless option, but I also have a bad feeling about it actually accidentally going off or being pressed when put into like a bag. We're only really going to be talking about this type of controller, the wired one instead of the wireless. So we won't really be talking about any type of caveats that come in with the wireless version of it. The design of the controller is definitely a callback on the retro era. As far as the button layout, the X, Y, and AB button display is starting to become a little bit more normalized, so it may not actually feel as familiar or nostalgic. But rest assured, if you were to overlay this with an SNES controller, you might see a lot of similarities there. Not to mention the nostalgic D-pad and start select that look very familiar to the NES controller as well. Honestly, this kind of looks like a hybrid between the SNES and the NES controller, but there's some distinctions to this one. You'll notice that there's like literally 2 analog sticks added to this controller. There's also a menu button, a share button. On the top bit, you notice shoulder buttons and triggers. When I was trying out this controller, I actually really liked the feedback that the buttons and D-pad was giving me. For what I understand, these are soft membrane, but yet at the same time, they have like a feedback that's almost close to like a mechanical feel. Can't really hear that one. Now we just talked about all the face value stuff as far as like the look and the feel for this controller. Let's actually like test it out in the field. Thankfully, I've already done that kind of stuff for you, and I have a lot to present to you. For a controller test, I felt like Tears of the Kingdom was a great option, considering the fact that it's a game that utilizes every single button input imaginable on the controller. Thankfully, the 8BitDo's controller had everything it needed. I think what I noticed first and foremost was going into combat and holding down L2 in this case. I think it's ZL. When you're playing on a Switch controller. For clarification, the 8BitDo has it L2, R2 versus the ZL and ZR on a Nintendo Switch Pro controller and its Joy-Cons as well. I'm in one of the beginning areas. This is actually one of the early like demo looks that we had of Tears of the Kingdom. Similar encounter here as well. Of course, when you progress further, there's a tougher enemy like further out. But we jump into this fight right here, and we're pretty over leveled. But I just definitely want to just get a feel of like just moving around while Z targeting. As you could probably guess, it's not the most comfortable controller, but it's certainly functional. When it comes to actually aiming with a bow, this was kind of an interesting scenario for me. Personally, I actually use the gyro aspect of the controllers to help with aiming as I move around. And I got really used to it, to a point where the lack of a gyro controller or gyroscope for the controller was definitely noticeable. And I just wasn't used to it. So a lot of like my bad takes with the bow in this recording sesh is definitely on me. Trying to add another layer of difficulty and intrigue into the combat mechanics. I actually dropped an item, at least I tried to, and I fused it with an existing weapon in the middle of combat. So it definitely works. The only things that are missing when you actually play through this game is the fact that you lack amiibo functionality because it's plugged into your controller. The next game I wanted to test out was Celeste. This is a fantastic 2D platformer. To be honest, this was just a perfect excuse for me to try out my deluxe version of Celeste that actually came through via Fan Gamer. Because this is a 2D platformer, I definitely emphasized the use of the D-pad. I'm not gonna lie though, it was kind of uncomfortable to kind of use in latter parts of like just the beginning of the level. If you're not familiar, in this game, you actually grab onto whatever ledge you're holding onto, the wall anyway, with L2 or ZL, and you actually have to hold it. And because of the distance between and the lack of a grip on the controller, pressing anything on the D-pad and holding L2 in my case. It was kind of uncomfortable. What I ultimately ended up doing was actually using the left stick instead. And I felt like that distance was perfect. Celeste gets pretty technical for sure, which is why it's very important for you to have a lot of accessibility and just overall control and comfort. Well, maybe not comfort, but it's definitely important for you to understand the layout of your controllers and be able to execute the correct, proper input. Otherwise, this game will definitely kick your ass for it. I actually played through this game using an Xbox controller via like Xbox Gold. I definitely worked the D-pad on that controller. I found that the D-pad on the SN30 Pro was not really comfortable for me specifically because of how kind of harsh the input is required for that one. It's not bad though. I like the immediate feedback that you get, but like upon execution, I found that the circle pad's actually better for this type of game, mainly because you have a lot of directional dashing. Then we jump into some of the retro stuff via Nintendo Switch Online. I tested a couple of games. One of them was Kirby Superstar Saga. Love this game. I've actually just jumped into the races, the gourmet race actually. This is one of my favorite mini games, just racing against King DDD. You can use the left stick on this one, but I actually opted in for using the D-pad, and I think for a game like Superstar Saga, as well as some of the other games, this totally worked. Kind of like going back to Celeste, this one doesn't actually have like too much directional like input other than up, down, left, right. So this is perfect. The other SNES game that I wanted to test out was actually Link to the Past. The top-down / isometric Legend of Zelda game. Heavily regarded. A lot of people love it. I actually never finished this game, but I did play it far enough so I can actually test it out. Found that the left stick was a little bit more easier to use. I think specifically my SN30 Pro is a little harsher on those D-pad inputs, and you know, trying to do diagonal inputs is kind of not too comfortable. So I stuck with the left stick on this one. I still got my ass beat though. Don't hold me to that, please. Then we tested out a couple of NES games. We're here playing Metroid. As you would probably expect, it works just fine. You forget how hard these NES games end up being. I was struggling for a little bit for the longest time though with Metroid, but it's totally doable using the D-pad and everything. Of course I had to pull this game up. Fellow Tanuki member Phil loves this game. It's his favorite Mario game. The physics is something I don't remember. I played this game like a long time ago on the original NES, and I just don't remember like how slippery the physics ended up being. But aside from that, it was totally playable. So for PC, I actually tried out Trails in the Sky. This is kind of the only way you can really play this one on like a modern platform. I'm actually playing this on the ROG Ally. You're probably asking why then use a separate controller when the controller is already built in with the ROG Ally. We're just testing, okay? But needless to say, it works totally fine. Although if you're playing on the ROG Ally, then yes, I would agree. You don't need a third-party controller. If you are playing on your PC though, and you do want to have like a controller instead of like keyboard and mouse, this is totally doable. And for my last test, I wanted to boot up Monster Hunter Rise. Now Monster Hunter Rise actually came out on the Switch, honestly before it came out on any other platform, but for the sake of this one and for the sake of space that was limited on my, you know, little ROG Ally, I decided to just use that one instead. Got into the tutorial after talking to everybody, and you know, it works perfectly fine. This is actually an important note. When you play through on Windows, it kind of has the same layout as an Xbox controller. As I said before, the 8-bit Do controller is meant for both Switch and the PC, but the button layout itself is definitely Switch orientated, so watch out for that. Now we've talked about like the highlights of this controller. What makes this one really good? Let's talk about some of the downsides about it. Talking specifically about the issues with the wired controller. One of the downsides is the fact that this doesn't have amiibo functionality. You can't really like scan any amiibos like on the Switch. This is also not the longest cable for this guy. Like, don't expect yourself to be in a living room situation where you have this guy plugged into the Nintendo Switch dock. That's closest to the TV as you try to move yourself across the room to hit the sofa and start playing. It's perfect if you're just sitting right in front of like your monitor plugged into the dock. Also, that's another thing. Because this one's wired, it can only be really plugged into the Nintendo Switch dock and whatever USB plug-in have accessible on your PC. Also, when it comes to the Nintendo Switch plugged into the dock, it actually won't wake up the Nintendo Switch from sleep. So just consider that as well. But yeah, that's pretty much it as far as the downsides of this controller. So yeah, overall thoughts, this is still a fantastic controller even to this day. This controller has been out for like a fair number of years. And, you know, for one of the first things I've ever seen from 8-Bit Do, it may not be the first thing for 8-Bit Do, but for the first thing, in my perspective, for 8-Bit Do, it's still a fantastic addition to your collection of like varying controllers. Whether you want to just take some time to play some old retro ones, get it like some kind of retro feel to it while actually having some benefits here and there with the shoulder buttons. The left stick is great. This is a pretty solid choice. But yeah, what do you guys think? Do you guys have a wireless version of this controller? Do you have another alternative controller that you would recommend? Let us know. Guys, I appreciate everyone for tuning in for this video. And if you would, please subscribe to the Tanuki channel. And yeah, expect more content. We still got some stuff underway. I'm thinking we should probably try to do some update videos as far as like stuff that you'll have on the ROG Ally, for example. I know people were interested in seeing what other games could like function on this controller. For sure. Or at least I think a lot of people were curious as to what other games you could actually play on the ROG Ally, so we should definitely try that out. Yeah, I got some ideas for shorts, so stay tuned for that one. But for now, I'll go ahead and call it here. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. We'll see you guys in the next one. Take care of yourselves, everybody.